Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm resident with my family, married 12 going on 13 years. I have a 10-year-old daughter, and we live down in Redondo Beach in Los Angeles. We moved there recently from Atlanta about 3 years ago. What I want to talk to you today is, the title of it's called Hero's Journey, is the title of my presentation. And it's going to be a little bit of an improvisation because I'm used to having a clicker. So what I might do, let's just kind of do a little point there on that side. But what I want to talk to you a little bit today is taking risks, all right? It's very easy when you, at some level, when you come to school, and I'm going to speak honestly, right? From the standpoint of also being a Christian, right? I accepted Christ when I was in high school. I grew up as a part of the student venture campus crusade. I think it's now called Crew. But that was kind of the coming of age youth development that I came into. And I know at times there can be a construct around kind of safety, right? And kind of staying together. But what I want to kind of flip that around a little bit and talk to you about risk. And I call it kind of the hero's journey as your career journey. Now, as a part of that, I may or may not look at, depending upon it, I'll be 51 in a couple weeks. So I was sitting where you were basically in 1990. I know that sounds ancient. Everybody here is born after 1990, I'm pretty sure, right, for the most part. So 1990, right? And I was an economics policy, political science major. And what I knew I was passionate about at that time was politics, right? I just liked the back and forth of politics, policy, big questions. Back then it was the Soviet Union, USSR, the national debt, still like it is today, right? 30 years later, at that issue. But I was passionate about that. And I came from a non-political family and didn't really know much about DC or state capitals, but that was, but it was on my heart to get involved in that. And what's important, I think, when we start thinking about risk at your stage, right, is there's an initial idea that somehow there's a right answer that you're supposed to arrive at while you're here for your life, right? That somehow magically by the time you're a senior, you're supposed to have figured it out and kind of be well on your way. Well, the good news is, and I can share with you, and good news, and you can call it kind of a small g gospel, is that even at 50, and I've got tons of peers, we still haven't figured it out. So you've got a lot of time, to take risks and to experiment. And I think it's especially important for faith people to take risks, right? Because at some level, we know how our life ends, right? We know where our ultimate destination is, right? And so I think there's an opportunity, particularly being in a faith-inspired, faith-based environment, to take risks. Let me show you something up there on the screen. Is just it looks linear. At some level, my career, I started off in politics. I worked as a political director in the state of Georgia for the Republican Party for a couple years back in the early 90s, back when kind of Newt Gingrich was first kind of rising into the House at that stage. Subsequent to that, I went to work for Coretta Scott King, who was the widow of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. While I was in Atlanta, and I was a director of programs. At that time, particularly was a lot of gang activity, youth gang activity. So we spent a lot of time teaching nonviolent resolution techniques to gangs across the country at that level. I later went on to work as a consultant with a firm to a number of mayors and governors around economic development, how to take areas of urban blight and potentially turn those areas around. That led me off to business school, where I got into Duke and graduated right at the kind of onset of the go-go days of the internet in the late 90s. That led to wonderful opportunity at PricewaterhouseCoopers, a number of other management consulting firms. I was able to do business in South Africa, in Europe, in Brazil, Chile, and Argentina. All of this happened in a very serendipitous way, right? There was no plan. When I was sitting where you were at, I didn't say, hey, this is what I'm going to do, right? So how did this get here? One of the things I wanted to kind of plant the seed in your heart around is this idea that your life, as wonderful as it will be, it's not linear. It's very easy to look at this now and kind of look back on it and make it look orderly, right? Like it's a line that's through there. But you can expect a lot of hills and valleys, and the valleys don't necessarily mean that you're low. It just means you're in a different period of evaluation, of reflection, of introspection. Right, one of the things that I find interesting about Gen Z, and I hate to use these kind of terms, but it's helpful, right, to understand that the life stage where you're at and the events that have impacted your life so far, one of the things that I have found as I've worked with maybe 60 or 65 universities and a number of employers, and when we talk about your generation, one of the things that we talk about is your fear of failure. That not only is it paralyzing, but it's actually generationally making you sick. All right? One of the fastest growing departmental budget things at universities these days is mental health. Now, that's not to suggest that if you have a mental health challenge or you're going through something that you should somehow feel like it's a failing. It just says that culturally, and particularly because I'm a parent and I'm very conscious of the messages that I put around my daughter about performance and failure and risk and all of that, that somehow maybe the generation ahead of you has done a disservice. Maybe we've kind of over-defined and over-scheduled and over-produced what success looks like, right? And what academic achievement and what college is like and what it's supposed to be for. So much so that if you're not somehow meeting it, you're putting a lot of stress on yourself, right? That you have to. Now, a part of what's interesting about how this connects to the marketplace is, as I mentioned before, that employers, one of the number one things when I talk to employers, and I say, well, what does a rock star candidate for you look like? One of the top 2 or 3 characteristics, they say high initiative, curiosity, resourcefulness, and a willingness to take risk. Now, why do they say that? Well, companies know internally right now that the change in market environments are moving so fast that whatever worked for you today might not be working for you tomorrow, right? And because of that, you need people who can kind of like fail fast, learn, move on, adapt, right? Now, at some level, you would say, and I know a lot of universities pitch this message, right, that the liberal arts, more broadly, produces that type of candidate, right? A critical thinker, teamwork, communicator, good oral and written communication skills. And there's some truth to that. But I think what's more important than kind of an academic approach to that, it's really how you view yourself, right? How many people here are familiar with Joseph Campbell? Does that ring a bell at all? Joseph Campbell was a sociologist who traveled the world, and he was basically researching storytelling, what allowed cultures from multiple places to kind of carry on traditions and certain values. And in doing so, he wrote a book called The Hero's Myth, and in it, he set out this kind of 12-step construct for how people tell a story. What's interesting about it is it's probably the number one framework used in Hollywood storytelling. So if you think of Luke Skywalker, if you think of Katniss from Hunger Games, you think of Neo from Matrix, those are all kind of hero's journeys frameworks. And what's important about that is in each of those cases, the protagonist, right, faces a call, right, kind of a call to action. Now, I know as faith-believing people, we have a tendency to think of a call as being some divine inspiration, right, that almost fatalistic at some level, where I've got my instructions, I'm gone. I'm going to encourage you tonight, or this morning, although it looks like night with the lights up here, I'm going to encourage you this morning to think about a call as being something a little bit more quiet, right? What is it that you're interested in life? What is your curiosity? Sometimes we use the word passion for. What is something that you love? Right? What's a problem that really bothers you? That you feel like, man, if I could vest my time trying to be a part of solving that problem, right? Climate change, it could be the sustainability industry, it could be food, how do we get healthier food to people who don't have food? There's tons of innovation going on in the food and beverage industry. What is that, right? And what's okay is to order your life around what's interesting, what's passionate. Now the challenge is, in modern day higher education, is what you're interested in doesn't necessarily always have a major, right? The emphasis we put on you is to choose a major, and then somehow you kind of then constrain yourself to, well, I want to try and find a path to that. I'm going to say liberate yourself from a major. Another good point from someone who's almost 51 is what you'll find is as soon as you get out of here, that almost no one will ask you about your major. Almost no one, right? And that's liberating, right? It's not to say that the time you spend here in your major is not helpful, it's just liberating, right? What it means is that what you're interested in, what your talents suggest that you're good at, what you experience has more relevancy necessarily than what you just studied and got the 80 credit hours enough to get the major. Okay, so next part of that then is, there's a good question that we often ask when I interview students. I say, what's your story? Right, like what's your narrative? Again, this gets back to a little bit, I think, some of the disservice that we do for students nowadays, where everyone tries to have this hyper-successful, I've never failed, I've always been a high-performing student, high-performing athlete, and that's why I should be accepted into whatever this opportunity is. I think the more powerful narrative, again, as hiring managers and employers tell me, and it's really a function of real life, is what have you overcome? Right? Each of you has a story here in terms of why you're here, why you chose here. Maybe it was your first choice, maybe it wasn't. Maybe you're here because of some other set of events in your family that made this the obvious choice for you. Right? I understand that I guess 10% of the student body here are atheists. Right? And we know too, as even faith-believing people, that amongst the 90% that have some profession of Christ, there's a huge spectrum. Right? There's the baby Christians on one end, and then there's maybe a little bit more mature Christians on the other end. And what's important about your narrative is it gives people a sense of really who you are. And who you are is really very important as you try and link with that opportunity in the marketplace. A resume doesn't tell you who you are. It's a chronological set of things that you've done and a couple things that you have a checkbox on. So I always ask young people, what's your story? And what's amazing is as soon as you give them permission, right, as I'm interviewing, it's amazing what you learn about students. Right? It's amazing the hobbies that they've got, the things that they've done on the side that are really more meaningful. And I'll stop and say, wait a minute. Go into that. Tell me more about that. Right? And then all of a sudden we make that the prime thing that we then say, this is what we're going to do when we sell you to employers or promote you to employers. Next question I ask is, what is your superpower? Right? What is your superpower? And this gets into the idea of what are you gifted at? Right? If I asked your mom and your friends and your aunts and I said, hey, listen, Sally, what is Sally really good at? Right? Is it organizing? Is it somehow her empathy is so great, she has the ability to read the room and kind of proactively move people? Like, what is that thing that you're really good at? Now, it's not your GPA necessarily, right? What is it that you're good at? A lot of what I do when I talk to employers is we talk about, and this is something that you find interesting, is that there's tons of empirical research already out there that says where you go to school, your GPA, and what you major in has very little predictive performance or predictive connection to how you perform in a job. But yet it's the overwhelming criteria we use to even determine if you get into the funnel. all right? So what we've tried to do as a company to try and liberate companies, and particularly hiring managers, to think more broadly about what does high potential, high fit talent look like, right? What are the behavioral characteristics? What are the personality characteristics? What are the cognitive characteristics that suggest that this particular person could be a much better fit as a business analyst or account manager or salesperson or customer service person than not? But part of that is inside the interview, you have to kind of own, well, what is it that you're great at? Why? Because then the very next question I want to ask you is then, based on what you're great at as an employer, how can you help me? Now, one of the things that I know typically happens when you're getting coached around interviews is you're kind of taught to be somewhat passive and kind of respond to the question being asked. We flip that and say, listen, most people, and I've hired probably 50 people over the arc of my professional career, particularly at the entry level, it's like, listen, most of us on the other side of the table really don't want to work that hard. What I really want you to do is I want you to sell me, right? I see a lot of resumes, I see a lot of people that kind of look great on paper, but I really want just someone to come in front of me and say, hey, listen, this is something I'm really good at. I'm really interested in this industry and kind of what you guys are doing in it. And this is how I think I could help, right? Based on some things maybe I've done in my past or things that I've been reading kind of on the side or whatever, this is how I think I could help. In the sessions that we'll have at Chapel and else, I'll kind of go into a little bit more detail in terms of how we use some kind of eHarmony-like technology to draw a talent index for yourself and then use some pretty sophisticated algorithmic math to then make predictions about what type of job role fit you'd be good at. And then how we use that to then help employers identify you out there. But I think the liberating message, again, if we want to take risks, is to understand that what you're interested in, what you're talented in, matters a lot more than just what you major in and what your grade is. So if you flip ahead to there's a thing that we like to inspire, empower, and equip. When we do surveys with young people, one of the things we realize is that a lot of young people don't know what it is they don't know. But yet a lot of adults expect you to act as if you already know it. So that kind of creates the dissonance. If I could get kind of just a rough show of hands here, I'm just curious, for those that are in here who are seniors, how many seniors do we have? Do we know exactly, do you have an idea kind of exactly where you're going come May, come June? How many kind of feel like they have right? That's good, I see a couple back there. Of the underclassmen that are here, right, at the university, how many of you, while you're here stretching, pulling yourself, how many of you feel like you have a really good sense of where you're going? It's pretty honest, right? Like, I mean, and that's okay. I heard a quote yesterday. Obviously, I think most people are familiar with the article, the scandal, I guess, that came out yesterday around the college admissions. And there's a thought leader named Jerry Salingo who's done a lot of studies about what happens to kids after college. And he's kind of broken them down into three groups, right? Where there's the sprinters, which is two guys in the back who kind of know exactly where they're going, and and they graduate and they're off. And then there's the wanderers, right? The group is the wanderers, they graduate and they kind of just bump into something and take something. And then there's the laggards, right? And then the laggards it may be a year or two even before they eventually grop onto something at that stage. But what Jerry said, it's not so much where you go to college or it's how you do college. It's how you do college. And what I love about my conversations with Christy and Mary from your career planning services team is while only a staff of 2 for a student body of 1,800 or so, they have a lot of energy, a lot of willingness to take some risks to figure out how do they help you encounter something that you can be passionate about and engaged in and provide a launch point for you. But it won't happen, right, if you don't take advantage of them being here. And again, I'll go into some more depths about where I think the opportunities are. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the companies that we work with directly in the lunch at the cafe and at the chapel. But let me leave you with one last message as we kind of come to the close here, is in terms of your call to adventure, in terms of viewing your life as one where you have more control or free choice, free will, right? I think, again, I know that, for example, when I was younger, and I'm sure you guys don't worry about this at all with all the modern day things you have in dating out there now with all the apps, but for a while, one of the big things when I was in college was just like, are you going to meet the one? Right? Nobody here worries about that anymore, right? You can just kind of go, and there's probably even an app called The One, right? You just go to, and you just like put in a few minutes, and the app through there. But what you find, I think, similar to the question of the one, is what's more important is the one you choose, right? Because what follows choice is commitment. If you somehow wait for something magical to kind of like come down or plop down kind of in front of you, and you're always keeping your options open, right? You're the generation of always keeping your options open, right? So no one ever really commits to a choice and then sees where that choice kind of takes them at that level. And so what I would encourage you on your career journey is to be confident that the voice inside of you, in terms of what you're interested in, curious about, passionate, is enough insight for you to make a choice about the initial step of your career path. That initial step's not going to define you forever, right? You saw my path. There was multiple steps along the way, right? No one has to make a career decision at 19, 20 that they have to stick to forever. But you do need to make a choice, and you do need to commit. The thing that bugs employers the most today about the current generation is an apparent lack of the ability to commit. Again, when you take a job or you start that initial job, it doesn't mean you're committing for 30 years. But while you're there, be wholly present, because we can feel that, right? Employers can feel that, right? When you got the job, you kind of show up and you're kind of halfway there, you're not really. Nowadays, companies perceive risk in hiring college graduates, right? There's tons of people with bachelor's degrees nowadays. Tons, right? This May, more than 1.2 million students will walk across the stage in graduation. Over 50% of them will be unemployed or underemployed for the next 12 months. Just a fact. All right? So it's more than the bachelor's degree. Again, I'll share a few more things about that. I appreciate your time through here. I love the worship experience. A couple of the songs I was unfamiliar with, but I kind of got the, Lord bless my soul, went through there. Hopefully maybe next time I come back, we can get like a little bit more of some gospel perhaps going through there, right? Can we get that through there? But I want to acknowledge Thomas. I really appreciate Thomas for the invite, Christy and the team. I look forward to fellowshipping with you a little later. And to, is it Micaiah? And I was with a couple guys last night at the gym. I came by to watch the intramural basketball game, and we shot around. I really appreciate the fellowship last night as well on that end too. Thanks very much, you guys. Appreciate it.